Here we see a creative, innovative, and economical way of adding Wi-Fi access to a wired local area network. Two boxes are shown, one closer to the internet than the other. The box closest to the internet is a conventional wired residential gateway. That's a very popular box because until recently, most of the internet service providers would make one of those available to their new basic customers as the entry point into the marketplace. It didn't have any provision for Wi-Fi. Sometimes there is a provision for Wi-Fi, but it's an extra cost option. You have to pay monthly to turn it on. So everybody that bought the most basic kind of internet access 3 or 4 years ago was stuck with a wired router or wired residential gateway device that didn't know how to do wireless, and they need to add something to it. They could add a wireless access point as discussed in other video clips here, but that's a little bit expensive. The second box in this diagram shows the less expensive way, taking advantage of economies of scale and market distribution that have brought the prices down on what's called a wireless router. Nowadays, wireless routers are very popular, and if you go into a high-technology store that has a section on local area networks and home networking, this is going to be the box you'll see the most. It duplicates a lot of the functionality in that wired residential gateway device. It does not have and does not need a broadband modem, but it does have a router and an Ethernet switch. Now, generally, you don't want to have two routers active in your home network. There are exceptions to that rule, but trust me, to keep it simple, you probably want to have just one router. That second box has a second router that duplicates the same functionality in the first box, and so you need a clever way to bypass it. Look at the way that thing is wired. Notice that the cable coming out of the first box bypasses the internet connection on the second box and goes into the Ethernet switch. That method of wiring bypasses the entire router section of that second box. Coming into the Ethernet switch on that second box connects you to its Ethernet switch, and because the internal wireless access point in that second box is wired to that Ethernet switch, your connection goes to that wireless access point as if it were just a wireless access point. It's a clever way to wire up a Wi-Fi router without routing. With this architecture, you do have to take a couple of extra steps configuring things to turn off or at least configure the second router so that it won't interfere with your network. These Wi-Fi routers generally have services in them that duplicate some of the services that you're already using in your wired residential gateway. So you'll talk to it with your browser and turn things off and simplify it. You'll also talk to the wireless access point portion to assign to it some encryption and radio channels, just like you would if it was an independent wireless access point. The advantage here is that these wireless routers nowadays are a lot less expensive than wireless access points. Simply because they're so popular, a lot of manufacturers are competing for that market space, and the economies of scale have brought the prices way down. It's not unusual to see these Wi-Fi routers selling for $25, $30 in the United States at the time of this publication in early 2010. That's about 1/3 the price of a Wi-Fi access point, for no good reason other than the fact that that's the way the market has priced things. Configuring all of this will require you to take some extra steps. First, you'll need to find a PC that you can hardwire to plug into that second box, and you'll need to get it speaking on the same subnet as the default IP address, the default administrative address that that box was programmed to use when it was new. Now, that subject is pretty well covered in the AskMisterWizard.com wireless networking section. Look particularly for the sections entitled Setting Up a Wi-Fi LAN the Easy Way, Parts 1 and 2. There's a lot of good guidance there in getting your wired PC to talk to these boxes for administrative purposes and dealing with the subnetting and the username and password issues, and all those principles are the same as described in that movie as we're going to be using here, except of course you'll be talking to the second of the two boxes. Once you've used those principles to get a hardwired laptop or PC connected to that second box, the Wi-Fi router, then you'll use the offered menus and functions to turn off some things. First of all, you'll want to turn off the DHCP service in that second box, because it would be confusing and unnecessarily complex to have two DHCP services running on your network. You just want one of those. And you'll also use those administrative functions to access the Wi-Fi functions as described in part 2 of that Setting Up a Wi-Fi LAN the Easy Way. You'll select radio channels and security with encryption and encrypting phrases. That information is well covered in that wireless networking section here at AskMisterWizard.com, especially in the Setting Up a Wi-Fi LAN the Easy Way Part 2. Just apply those same principles according to this new architecture, and you'll be good to go. Once you've finished configuring that second router, you may never need to configure it again. You may never even need to talk to it again. Accordingly, even though it might be on a separate IP subnet, it isn't really that urgent that you change that to the same subnet as your other residential gateway device. You can just leave it on a separate subnet and ignore that subnet forever if you like. If you anticipate needing to talk to it often, if your network is dynamic and you anticipate a lot of changes, then it's probably worthwhile to reconfigure that second router to be on the same subnet as the first. But of course, make sure it doesn't duplicate the same IP address of anything else you're using. Because of the way these two boxes are wired, bypassing that second router, all of the Ethernet connectors in both boxes are on the same IP subnet. This means that communication between the various computers in your house or small office will work whether it's designed for internet communication or for local communication. All of those jacks are essentially equal. Plug your own PCs into any of them.